Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host, Brian Tankersley. Today, we want to speak to you about Power Automate. Many of you have the Microsoft 365 platform, and you already have a robotic process automation tool known as Power Automate. Now, Power Automate is just one of 5 Power modules that Microsoft sells. So, Brian, do you want to try to explain those 5 different Power platform modules?
Yeah, and the reason it's such a big deal here is because a lot of you have spent a lot of time on Power BI, maybe where you're putting together metrics and things like that for your clients. And the beautiful part about this is that Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Pages are all built on a common platform of data connectors and an AI builder and have a common data service. So the idea here is that once you've figured out how to get data in and out of these others, it's going to be much easier to work with the more complex things. And again, if I'm looking at these in ascending order of complexity, I'd say Power BI is probably the easiest of them, followed pretty shortly thereafter by Power Automate. And then the last 3, you really have to be a little more sophisticated to work with: Power Apps, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Pages. So for this session, though, we're going to focus primarily on Power Automate, which is our workflow tool here. The advantage of this combined platform, though, is that these data connectors, you have over 1,000 connectors in here that are set up. And the beautiful part about it is once you've figured out how to work with the connector in one of the tools, they're pretty much the same connectors in the others. And so that's in here. Also, if we've got to ingest data into it for batch processes or other things like that, you've got again the Power BI data store, and you've got the Microsoft Dataverse where the data can be stored. And again, you just got a lot of great capabilities in here. The reason I want to talk about Power Automate is that I think that there are some very interesting things that can be done to automate your processes with Power Automate that you ought to look at.
Yeah, so Brian is not to distract because I want to go to Power Automate next, but the Power Virtual Agents, I've been reflecting on how agentic AI will work, and I suspect Microsoft's going to continue to morph Power Virtual Agents further down that way because originally I pictured them more like chatbots. And you and I have talked about workflow automation and some of the sophisticated things that Microsoft is doing with their workflow as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see new Power modules for other things like workflow and agentic AI actually surface along the way. But Power Automate, it's simple enough to use that most of you can leverage it today. And if you are doing repetitive tasks, Power Automate may be in your future.
Yeah, so again, we talked a little bit about the Power Platform here, but again, it's a low code, no code tool set. And that's the important thing here, is that some of the tools like Power Apps are pretty hard to use if you're, if you're not pretty technologically sophisticated. But Power Automate has enough that you can pick up that you can do, you can figure out about 20% of the options in it, and you can do 80% of the work. Okay. And that's kind of the way I look at Power Automate in here. Again, because of those common interfaces, they're a big deal. And so again, Power Automate does event-triggered data flows between hundreds of applications. That used to be called Microsoft Flow. You can put in there business logic and rules that you can connect up to a data flow or a workflow with a no-code, low-code approach. It also has an integrated robotic process automation tool. Think of RPA as basically macros in Windows that run across multiple applications. Okay, so where if you may have used macros in Word or Excel in the past, but you could only use them within that one application. With RPA, you really have an action recorder and replay engine that works across most applications in Windows. So, again, if you don't have an interface and don't have any hope of getting an interface like a legacy on-premises tax application, then the Power Automate's RPA tool, the desktop version of Power Automate, may be in your future. There's also Power Apps that lets you build custom applications. I'm not really going to get into that because this doesn't fit much with our audience. Power Virtual Agents, like Randy talked about, is for agentic AI. And again, we expect to see more offerings in this space. As we look though at the UI for Power Automate, again, you've got it's a typical Microsoft interface. You've got a navigation pane on the left side. You have a search box up at the top. You also have information on the environment. So you can actually have, this is more of an advanced thing, but you can have kind of a production environment and a test environment where you're trying things out before you start running these flows and they end up creating bogus records in your CRM system or in your accounting system. There is an AI co-pilot you can use, learning tools, as well as you can ask a chatbot. So again, the beautiful thing about this is that with this co-pilot up here, you can ask it questions and then it can put the modules together that it effectively thinks you're going to need. Now it will, it's very much like the tool set that you would use if you were repairing a car or putting in some stuff putting in some electrical wiring with an electrician or putting in plumbing with a plumber. It'll tell you the items in there, but it won't tell you exactly what you're going to have down to a fine-tooth comb, but it's going to get you in the ballpark of what you need, and then you'll have to do some work to figure it out. There's also in here, this is the sidebar menu. Nothing super exciting here. I would call your attention to the templates that are in here because there are a wide range of templates. If you're starting with these things, one of my favorite things to do is to start out with a template and then to modify it to meet my needs. So what I try to do is, if I'm trying to do, let's say I'm trying to send a text message with weather to somebody, then I'll find something that interacts with weather or find something that interacts with text messages. I'll look at the code and the stuff behind that, and I'll figure out how to take the parts I need out of each one and put them together almost kind of like a Lego set where you can't get exactly what you want, but you have two things that are close enough that you think that you can kind of mash them up and get things going.
So two key things in this menu of Power Automate is the My Flows. If you create a flow or someone else has created a flow and shared it with you, you can view or edit it, and you can share and edit flows that you've created. So the more friends you have, the more flows you can share and create. But you also have the process mining piece in here. So you can actually see how the workflow works. And my expectation is that Microsoft will leverage that more as time goes on. So I think we're going to see more workflow automation.
Yeah. Now the process mining is actually, they'll let you have a trial of it, but then it's an add-on. And I think it's about $200 a month per user once you add it on. But again, it's one of those tools that if you need it, you need it. And if you need it and you're an organization big enough to have a lot of transactions where you need to process mine them, the $200 a month is almost immaterial.
Yeah. And, some of the AI process mining that's going on, I think we're going to get more AI inside this as well. But you're correct. It is not part of the base Power Automate.
Cool. Okay. So in here, we also have a number of key terms in here. We'll talk about triggers, connectors, flows, and expressions. Okay, so triggers are events that start a workflow automatically. So maybe you added some records, a new record to a SharePoint list, or an email came in, or somebody filled out a web form, or somebody created an invoice in QuickBooks, or somebody interacted with a post on social media, or even a specific time. The clock hits 5:15 a.m. A time is reached every day. So the triggers, again, you have to think of this as the lightning or the thing that breaks loose and pushes this toward execution, as opposed to just kind of sitting there doing nothing. Then we have connectors, and these are the automated connectors that can integrate Power Automate with other apps without having to write code. Again, you can write API calls and Python scripts and stuff in just about any language you want, and then feed it in through Visual Studio to work with Power Automate. But the real action here for most of us is that I can use the 1,000 existing connectors to solve a lot of my problems. Now, I can't solve all of them without writing code, but I can solve a lot of them. We also have flows, and these are interconnected steps that automate a business process. And so these, again, can be easy, they can be complex, they can have multiple steps, they can have branching and looping logic. So you can actually create simple approvals with workflows. You can create more complex workflows and more complex automation tools with Power Apps and Power Automate together. Again, within Power Automate, you have three major kinds of flows. There are cloud flows that are triggered based on, again, one of those events, and they get triggered instantly based on a trigger or a schedule. So an example of this might be the trigger that I have that I'm going to use right now. If you're watching this on video, you can see my lighting's great right now. I'm going to now turn my studio lights off by hitting a button. And you can see that I've kind of gone a little darker. Maybe you can't see that, but I know it went a little bit darker. And again, you saw the flash when I turned the lights back on just a second ago. But again, like pressing a button, there's just some action that triggers this thing. So for example, you might have something where somebody applies to be a member of a club, and then it has to be approved by somebody. And so then when they fill out the form to apply, that would trigger one thing that would maybe initiate the approval process and then send it out to somebody for approval. Then once it was either approved or denied, that might kick off other workflows that would then move them further through the step of getting them onboarded and set up as members in a club. So these, again, these flows that are based on triggers or schedules are in there. It could just be that every day at 4 o'clock, you download the transactions of what's happened and update your Power BI stuff. We have desktop flows that use RPA to do these repetitive tasks with legacy Windows applications. And of course, the business process flows that will automate and execute the business logic associated with the processes. Okay. There are also templates. And again, there are hundreds of templates in here to solve different things. This is the real secret sauce for people learning how to do this. There's obviously training and things like that you can pick up. But my favorite thing to do, your first bot that you create probably ought to be something that somebody else already created, and then you just make it work with your stuff to get used to the environment. And then, after a while, you might go through and modify a template to do something different. But don't forget that there's also, besides the templates, there are also tools like the Describe It to Design It tool that's now they're calling that one Copilot for Microsoft 365, where again, the AI will basically put the pieces together that you need. Kind of like when you go to the auto parts store and you say, well, I've got to do a brake job on an 08 Honda Civic. They would identify that. They'd ask you a few questions and figure out what engine you had and what kind of brakes you had and whether it was front or rear and all those things. And then they would give you a list of what most of the things were you need. Now, it wouldn't have everything in it, but it'd have most of everything. And then you'd have to get directions and figure out how to put the stuff together. Kind of the same thing happens with those templates. They put the parts together, but then you have to go in and do some customization and some hookup to kind of make those pieces work together the way you want.
So if you think about things that you're doing repetitively, these templates are frequently going to be able to help you with that. We'll just pick a simple one like saving attachments, because I have a work habit that if anybody sends me an email, the first thing I do is save the attachment so I don't have to come back and find it later. And, there's Power Automate templates to do those types of things.
Yeah, but it could be to post something to a Teams channel. It could be to send an email. It could be to forward something that was sent to a shared mailbox to somebody else, or maybe even forward. Like if you have an AP shared box, you might even forward that to Bill.com immediately as soon as it comes in. Who knows? So those are all there. We also, again, as we get the results, you could actually visually see how things work out. And again, you can visually, you can create a lot of stuff very rapidly with this. And so as we move into this world where we're using more and more automation, the places where you're doing lots of repetitive tasks, now that AI is coming into its own, I wouldn't, I think you need to look at some of these automation tools so that they can again handle a lot of the routine things that you need to do instead of you having to do it. Randy, what comments would you have on Power Automate at this point?
Well, we have asked you to look at robotic process automation with more sophisticated tools over the last 7 or 8 years, Automation Anywhere and many, many more. But most of you own Power Automate today. If you're doing repetitive things, it may be time to spend just a little bit of learn time around Power Automate and the whole Power Platform for that matter to see what it can do for you. And I think you might be surprised. Once you get into it, you will actually, I think, get in the hang pretty quickly and be able to automate many of the things that you're doing that are mundane day to day. And I'll just pick on, as an example, you want to copy things out of QuickBooks into Excel sheets, or you know, things that you do repetitively every day or once a week, you can automate. Other ideas, Brian?
I think it's a great tool. I think it's something that you have to learn, but I think you need to throw some time at it. We in this day and age of automation, if we're going to really have good automation, we have to learn and become more like plumbers and less like people that carry water in buckets. Okay. You and I are used to keying in our own data, and we're used to again dealing with paper and all those kinds of things like that. Really, we're trying to get into a world where the technology deals with the data entry and so forth. And so you have to learn enough about the digital plumbing to be able to be effective with this. And so Power Automate is a key thing here. It is effectively the plumbing and the valves and the compressors that it takes to the pumps to move this data around to the different places. And so with a little bit of learning, it makes it a lot easier to take this tool and let it handle a lot of your routine things that cause you stress, and really just lets them get handled automatically.
Sounds super. Well, we appreciate you listening in today. We'll talk to you again soon in another Accounting Technology Lab. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.